is welcome everyone. Today is Wednesday, the 18th of April. The price of Ether right now is about $516 on Poloniex. Thank goodness. We had a bit of a scare there for a couple weeks. That was no fun. We've got a bunch of people, a lot of our social media regulars here at this meeting to talk about pillar governance. Now, I'll get right into it. I'll just welcome everyone and thank you for participating from far and wide. We've got 6 outside people, and then me and Josh. Josh is about 20 feet away from me in the other room. I want to start by acknowledging, first of all, of you guys and your energy and interest in our project. As you know, it has not been that easy the last several months, and we've made a bunch of changes, and we're making strategic decisions, fairly regularly. And we make them more or less on the fly, but we also want to involve our token holders a little closer, and we're taking steps to move them closer in a fairly organic way without doing a lot of top-down deciding who's in and who's out. Because, I may or may not like guys with dark blue, with navy blue caps, but that doesn't mean that they should or should not be on the Token Holder Council. That's not the way to do it, right? So, and what is the Token Holder Council and what does it do? We've talked about this before, and I gave, since the last conversation, an assignment to one of our associated lawyers in Switzerland to send us some information about Swiss foundation law, which, how many people have had a look at the short document that Benedict has made? So with thanks to Benedict, I will incorporate that into the meeting by reading a few of the salient points. Most of them are page 3 and 4. The basic gist is that a Swiss foundation is an autonomous organization that cannot be bought, that runs according to its purpose and is served by its foundation council. And it actually has some degree of interaction with government. The government can say, hey, you're not doing what you said you do, or this doesn't sound like, according to the principles of your charter. But as long as you're pretty much fulfilling the duties of your charter, then you're not going to get them bugging you too much, but they are actually technically a little bit involved. And so we have 3 different kinds of foundation, and I believe, and I have to actually, that's why I'm looking for Rob, but to verify, I believe we are an operational foundation, but we may be an economic foundation. I'm not on the foundation council. That's Rob and some other people who are in Switzerland. And I'm on the 2030 side as kind of the chairman of the board and that kind of thing. So I will be a council member, but not yet. Not all of the cement is dry or set in Switzerland. Just to give you the idea of the relationship, we have the foundation, Swiss foundation, and right below that, we have a Swiss AG, which is a corporation. And it's a nonprofit corporation, and we're still working on tying these two together so that the assets of the AG are all owned by the foundation. Forgive me, I still have a cough, and I will probably do a bit of coughing. The AG, which is called Pillar Project AG, used to be called 2030 AG. We changed the name. And so 2030 AG was the thing that held all the tokens. So we decided to make that a nonprofit and then have it owned by the foundation so no one can ever buy it. We're still in the process of that. And just to go to page 3 and 4, I want to start off our conversation by reading the 2 options that we may choose. So the council governs the foundation. And there are 2 ways to involve, let's call them outsiders. They can have consultative voting power or direct representation. This is something we actually hinted at a couple of months ago when we had 6 weeks ago on our last call. But now we have word from our lawyer that there are 2 ways to go. So I'll read them. The Foundation's council may consult the members of the Pillar ecosystem before making resolutions which are binding. The consultative voting right might be exercised by members of the Pillar ecosystem electronically via polls or a later stage via some voting mechanism, and that could even be built into the Pillar wallet. This consultative right is a sensible means of including members of the Pillar ecosystem in the decision-making process of the Foundation's council, which ultimately governs the Foundation's decisions and direction. It must, however, be noted that this right is not legally binding, and the Foundation's council may nonetheless decide to vote differently in regards to a certain resolution. Or option B, direct representation. Due to the somewhat limited power of the consultative voting power, as outlined above, the Foundation could further participation of members of the Pillar ecosystem in the decision-making process by having a direct representation by either establishing an advisory board in addition to the Foundation's council, or by committing to allocate a permanent seat in the Foundation's council to a member of the Pillar ecosystem as chosen by a member of the Pillar ecosystem during an online-based voting event, or as chosen basically however we want to choose them. For example, an example that I've been thinking about is that we have a consulting council. That would be called what did I call them? Just a token holders council that could have 2 parts. That could have an inner and a core group and an outer group. The core group would be given access to non-public information, and could also then could be consultative, but could also have 1 board seat and 1 vote on the board. Now, could have 2 votes. We're not saying it can't. I'm not even sure how many people are on the board or however many people have been sort of allocated in our charter, and I forget, I wrote it, but it was too long ago, so I forget. But it's something like 5 out of, well, there's certain degrees of, majority votes for certain decisions. Phil is writing, outsiders can have consultative voting power or direct representation. You're just kind of taking notes? Yes, he is just taking notes. Fine. Okay, good. For people who can't hear, which is cool.
I have a question. What types of things would be voted? What types of things would be voted on?
Right. So we've made some major decisions over the past few months. An example is we bought a little company, and we haven't announced the company or the purpose of it yet because we're still working on. It's kind of a lab, Pillar Lab Works, Skunk Works operation at the moment. But that was a pretty big decision. We also made we make a couple kinds of decisions. We make financial decisions, how to manage our money and how much to allocate into various things. And then we make strategic decisions on, what to do or which company to buy or what, so forth. And many decisions are both, because we make almost not quite, but almost no decisions purely financially. Like we have done a bit of diversification, but that was for good reason. That's only financially. That was not for strategic reasons. We've also made an investment in a venture fund that is strategic to us and that we believe will provide a good return for us. And we're not giving away too much of that just right now. We want to be able to make that more formal at some point. We'll kind of write it up at maybe even at the summer meeting. We made that investment in January. And so these kinds of things. So, Jen, the one way to think of it is kind of $1 million and up kind of decisions. That's a kind of a good guideline, right? Another would be an example of another one I just thought of. Well, things that are procedural that have to do with, like, should we open an office in Tel Aviv? That's a smaller level thing, but it may be the council level thing. A couple of months ago, we made a strategic investment of 100,000 euros into the Blockchain Center Vilnius. So we are founding executive members of that. That was a $100,000 decision. We also became executive members of the Chamber of Digital Commerce in the United States. We felt that was very important. Do these $50,000 and $100,000 decisions get made by the council? Nah, they don't. But, I would have no problem bringing our Token Holders Council in on these decisions and hearing them and hearing their opinions. That sounds good to me. So what we've been doing over a period of months is wearing people down, and by attrition, we're kind of left with the diehard group here, the people who are still with us, which is not necessarily a bad way. It's better than interviewing, if you ask me. I like the fact that people are willing to hang in there and just, stick with us and work with us. And the longer they do that, the more they kind of earn their seat at the council. So this is a general conversation for people. I would say that the structure I'm looking for is a two-part council. One is kind of more public and interested in having public discussions on future things we should do, or at the very least keeping people informed and having a good, strong, unified voice from our token holders, and a good, strong listening power to listen to what's going on out there and feed it back to us and say, Dave, you should not write these people off. They have an important point. You should listen to them. Things like that. Whatever kind of two-way communication role they can play is probably helpful. The other is to have an inner group that might be roughly about the size of this group here, that would be under non-disclosure, and that we could share things with, and we'd have a private Mattermost channel, we'd have private emails, and so forth. And then that we could invite to any meetings. We actually, technically, we've had very few foundation level meetings. The foundation level is very different from the operational level. So at the foundational level, it is kind of that $1 million and up sort of decisions. But very happy to have token holders in on our, the little decisions that are the $50,000 decisions that we think are important. Not the $50,000 decision to buy the ballpoint pens that I happen to like. That was my own decision. But the decisions to get, into a certain group or set up an office, these kinds of things. And then the question is, how much
one of the things
should they have on the, I'm going to mute Jen. How much voting power should they have on the council? Now, I think I went over this last time. There's kind of normal conditions where of 1 or 2 votes on, say, a 5-member or 7-member council is totally reasonable. But there are other times, and this is written into various corporate law in different countries, when, if things go, if there's sort of black swan event, something particularly bad happens, and there are a number of these potential things, then maybe the token holders should become even more involved. And if you think sort of about the ultimate worst case scenario, you could imagine that things have gone so badly that the token holders should more or less step in and control the organization and its assets. This can happen and there are countries in which the government is allowed to step in and take control of a company if there, for example, has been fraud, systemic fraud. By, Enron would be an example. The government in the United States is, I believe, Phil may be able to tell me, but I believe is in certain circumstances of public companies able to step in. In the UK, I know it is. I know that the government is allowed to play the role of, the policeman on behalf of shareholders if something very bad happens. So there are different levels. There's sort of the ordinary everyday levels of decision making, which is great to have many voices on. There are some maybe important ones where it could go either way, where it could cast a deciding vote, perhaps. And there are the black swan event things where potentially the council should play an important role in some kind of a worst case scenario rescue. Now Phil is asking a bunch of questions. Let me just say them, if I may. How do we recruit new people to volunteer for a term on the council? Don't even know what a term is yet. What are the duties of a council member? Characteristics we seek. How much diversity do we want? That's part of the reason I'm asking people to kind of self-assemble. And what are the duties to the charter or society? What do the duties of a token council member to the charter or society override duties to management if there's a crime taking place, etc., or dealing with authorities, things like that? What if you are a token holder council and you learn something that management is planning to do that's against the law or something? So there's a bunch of these scenarios. I think one thing I will say is we're not going to decide all this now. We're making good steps. I like the volunteerism, so I'm pretty happy to have a group roughly this size be the sworn to secrecy, people who are able to be exposed to what is it called? Non-public information. But then what if someone else wants to, or what if someone wants to leave? There are certainly several examples out there from other foundations and companies that we could start to look at. We can kind of, from my note from Benedict tells me, we can kind of make it up however we want, although we will formalize the voting structure for the council, and I'll get back to you probably in the chat in the Mattermost on what the actual rules are, because we've already set that up. But so what do people think right now? And I guess one good assignment coming out of this is for us to look at some proposals. The ultimate goal, if I could have my dream wish, would be that we would all come together in Vilnius in July, and we would kind of ratify our charter and the planks of our platform and hammer it into place and then sign it and say, okay, now we've got a token. We really have a token holders council, and they really have power now. That could take place before July, but I doubt it. I'd be really happy to have a good, strong token holders council, framework in place by then and sign it. So anyone, anything? We can get to the questions as we go.
I would like to see this move forward as quickly as possible. That's the main thing.
Speed from Josh. Anything else?
Yeah, so yesterday is when I found out about the Token Holders Council, and I reached out to some people that are strong in the Telegram community who I happen to know are big token holders, and they're pretty passionate about being involved, staying on top of all the announcements, the news, and they're really active in keeping people abreast of what's going on as much as they can. And what I found was they were not even on Mattermost. Some of them had difficulty getting on Mattermost, so then I was trying to help them with that. Others might have been on Mattermost, but hadn't been in a while. And so what I saw was there are people that I think would be really great for this council that didn't even know about this or have access to it. And the only reason I found out was because Polly tagged me in something that sent me an email. So I think that there are some valuable members that didn't make it to this call because they didn't even know about it. And I tried really hard to get them tuned in yesterday, but it was more than a 24-hour process.
That's cool. We want them, and we want their energy and their wisdom. So we need to figure that out. Of course, I spend my time much more on matters.
More of an FYI.
Yeah, and I don't spend much
It
time.
was most of an FYI.
Yeah.
I know.
We did
It's
set
okay.
we did set this meeting today out in a previous newsletter and in, I think, yesterday's newsletter possibly. But I won't be surprised if certain people who, should be here are not here. That's okay. They can watch this and we can keep moving things forward. Vic, you've got any things to share?
A bunch of stuff, David. I'll just try and keep it focused. But I just, due to my background, I tend to approach all this more from public security knowledge and experience. My own sense, and again, I like Jennifer and other folks, I am responsible for maybe getting a bunch of folks, different locations into Pillar. There are a lot of questions, sometimes concerns.
Sure.
I'm all for Josh's vote. Let's get this together, whether it includes us or me, or as quickly as possible, because I think it's very important that Pillar make a decision about how it's going to cohesively distribute public information. I watch, as I'm sure all of you do, many of the other crypto type entities out there. I see different approaches, and what I find is folks that tend to be very focused with their message, they tend to underpromise and overdeliver, whether it's a time issue or a functionality issue, and they seem to be rewarded for that. We all look at price as a way to being rewarded, which probably isn't the right thing to do. But I think my own sense is there are a lot of folks that really want to support this project, even as just holders, big holders, and they're not really sure how to do that. So I think the sooner Pillar can figure out how to be cohesive about delivering a very consistent message about the direction they're headed, I think you'll be rewarded immensely for that. So any way I can help with that, or if that resonates with folks, I'd like to look at Pillar as just a public company. How are we going to disseminate information that needs to be disseminated and make people happy? So
yeah, as I say several times a day around here, there's just no substitute for shipping a wallet. That goes a long way. That speaks louder than a lot of the words, and we're just not there yet. So,
but it's
frustrating for me.
If I'm allowed to push back a little bit, the message about regulation in the exchange, it's important, and we certainly all understand that. But that scared a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I think perhaps it confused a lot of people, because when I first got involved with Pillar, I wasn't thinking exchange. Actually, it was the last thing I was thinking about when I got up early in the morning to try and get my ether in on time. And it just, again, I don't mean this to be negative, but constructive. I think maybe a lot of folks took away from that call the idea that, oh gosh, it's another one of those exchanges. We're going to have New York regulators talking about it. We're going to have the SEC issues. And where that's important, I guess I still don't believe that's a primary focus, or maybe shouldn't be a primary focus of Pillar. I always thought the vision was much grander.
Oh yeah,
than an exchange.
Of course.
Because exchanges are a dime a dozen today.
Oh yes.
I'll stop there.
No, that's good. I mean, just to quickly explain that, I mean, we made the decision back in about January that it should include an exchange just for completeness of experience, that if you want to buy a Pillar token, you should not have to leave the Pillar wallet. That doesn't make sense. And if you want to buy something in the taxonomy and available offer, they should be priced in units of account that have, some fungibility, so that you could say, well, that's priced in this, but I want to pay in this, and the exchange facilitates all of that. The other thing, and I've said it a bit publicly, we want to have dollars on the wallet. Dollars on the wallet are going to be a big deal. Euros and pounds on the wallet will be a big deal. that involves lots of licensing and lots of behind the scenes work that you just don't turn on. So again, having the exchange facilitates all of that. All those things that we want to have later, just have the exchange baked in. So it's not yet another crypto exchange, that's for sure.
So but again, that's an important message, I think, to
Yeah.
just be very consistent about.
Yeah, I think it's probably a lot of it is in the update I did 2 weeks ago, but I know that people misunderstood it, and we re-recorded a little. We re-recorded a little clarification about it, and it did spook people. And right now, things are down across the board. And it's not fun, but when we do ship and people will see it, then we will be. I think we will be coming back pretty handily. But yeah, I take that. That's a totally reasonable comment. Others?
Just an observation at the most fundamental level. From my perspective, a council's role essentially are rights and responsibilities. And once we've identified what those rights and responsibilities are, I suspect that things will then start moving forward quite, well, should say fairly easily, in fact, because we'll actually know what it is we're really talking about. I think one of the things that I've picked up following a lot of the conversations, particularly around the actual token holders online and various communities, is this seeming inability to distinguish between the role of Pillar itself and the coin out in the real world, or at least the token out in the real world. The notion that a council can actually have some kind of impact on how the token, direct impact on how the token performs in the markets. And I think it's these sorts of confusions that need to be ironed out. And, I use the term rights, I use rights and responsibilities as a shorthand, but it's making, again, I suppose to some extent it answers to Vic's question. Who speaks for those fundamental decisions, which may or may not be misconstrued? And where is the backstop for that? Is that within something like a council, or is it the management of the Pillar project, or where does that sit? So, I mean, that's the one observation I've taken away from the last couple of weeks since the last meeting, is as soon as the notion of a council is proposed, it kind of becomes the backstop or the sort of deus ex machina, out of frame, but seems to be a motion of last resort, and so on and so forth. So,
What? I missed that. What you?
Well, the notion that there is a sort of a machine behind the front, as it were. Does that not make sense?
I still don't quite. In other words, it helps make things more transparent. Makes more transparent.
I think there is the potential for the assumption for those who don't understand the distinction between a council and management, that a council is in some way that is almost a council of last resort when management doesn't do for the token what we're expecting the token to do.
Oh, okay.
There is some kind of. Does that make sense?
Yeah, backstop. So I understand. So first of all, I have to be, and people are going to be able to see this and say whatever they want. This is not a private conversation. I have to be very careful what I say about the token, right? Jay Clayton has said, if a token for a washing machine is not a security, but if you sell a bunch of tokens to people to build the laundromat, later in the future, and the tokens will be not only good in the laundromat for use, but they could be speculated on and this just bought for the purpose of reselling to others at a higher price, that is a security. So we want to be very, very careful and mindful of the fact that we have many American token holders, that we firmly believe we have a utility token, and that all I really am able to talk about and interested in talking about is the utility of the token. So, for example, if whatever I say, if I'm just doing my best to tell people what's going on, if it causes the price of the token to drop, I don't really care much. I believe that in the end of the day, the token will reflect the value of the system. And if it goes down in the meantime, and then, when we ship and we show that we're doing what we said we're doing, it comes back up. I'm not trying to manage the price of the token at all. I'm very carefully not trying to manage the price of the token, right? So I do not try to make, and this is different from a CEO of a public company who in many cases has to manage exactly what he says with what happens, with what analysts write the day after and what happens in the markets. I don't have any of that. I have a utility token that I'm trying to make a system for so people can get the utility out of it. If it has volatility, if it goes down before it goes up, my goal is to use that money to build the best system I can. Vic.
It's another fantastic point, and I've always sort of felt you might be the Superman in this regard. And I know it's a hot topic for you, distinguishing between equity and owning a piece of a platform, or the utility of a platform.
Utility of a platform.
And the folks I chat with, just by virtue of the folks I've interacted with for the longest period of time, think in terms of equity. And it's been such a dramatic series of conversations, some happy, some angry, some confrontational, trying to explain the difference between utility and equity. And I've just always thought you'd be the great poster child to speak for the community and get away from this stupid idea that, yeah, it's just market cap, right? It's just price times number of tokens, and just how antiquated an idea that is, and it doesn't fit into this new sausage maker we're building. So yeah, I think that theme at a much higher level coming from you would be yet another thing that would help distinguish Pillar as like, oh yeah, this is where I go to learn what utility is really all about.
I hope I've been saying it from the beginning, and I will just want to say publicly, during the ICO and right in the thing you had to sign on the page where you were signing up for, it said, limit your exposure. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Do not load up on these things hoping you're going to sell them to somebody else later at a higher price, because that's not what they are for.
Yeah, but David, it's kind of like buying a new cell phone, right? Who reads the 92-page contract?
Well, no, actually there were 6 things you had to acknowledge before you bought. And that was one of them. There were
anything I could do to push you in that direction, make you even louder.
Yeah.
Not just in terms of specifically Pillar, but this new ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, a part of it is we have to be careful. We've got people watching us, and we want to be part of the solution for the SEC. We want to be part of the solution. We would hate to be shut down because we want to bring out products and services that will change this ICO market for the good and make them more, believe it or not, compliant with the law, because that's what equity tokens should do.
It's for grandmas, so it's a great theme.
I got a team of guys who are right back here in that room working on equity token platform that we hope replaces a lot of the ICOs with a fully compliant solution that we can sell to Americans. Can we sell it to the public? No, that's up to Congress and the SEC to decide who we can sell it to. But at least getting it out of this crazy ICO, where 2 people can buy the same token, and one is buying a utility and one is buying a security. And that is what we have right now. Just like Jay Clayton said, if you're buying a bunch of these tokens in hopes to sell them, the laundromat tokens, in hopes to sell them to someone else later at a higher price, that is a security. However, if you buy them to use to wash your clothes because there isn't a laundromat anywhere near you and you've got a burning need and you think this solves your need, you're not buying a security. Yeah. So there's paragraphs and paragraphs of stuff I can't say about this because I'm in the utility token business, and I have no interest in. I have to be very careful not to give anyone the idea that that I care about the price of the token. Frankly, I think I'm the world's largest pillar token holder, and I really don't care. I'm looking at it as a 5 to 10 year thing. And do I have to make money on it? No, I don't. I want to see it succeed. Frankly, we don't have enough money to do everything we want to do on our agenda. If Ether goes to $5,000, then maybe we would. But we've got a huge agenda, and we're here to change the world. And we're going to use every last token we've got to help, build that system and create that utility. I'm not too worried about what happens later because we have a whole bunch of tokens locked up after 10 years. But there might be between 5 and 10 years and some skinny years where we don't have much income. I don't know. It depends on a lot of things. So this is kind of what the Token Holder Council is going to do. We're going to tell the core group everything that's going on, and they're going to say, holy smokes, that's a lot. And geez, now we see why your wording is so, you word things so carefully. And then we're going to all decide how to help communicate. I see that as the number one job of this council. The number two job is just to have a different voice at the council table to make sure that we're making good decisions. And the third, some kind of rescue, just in case the worst thing ever happens, then the token holders get more involved. But I see that as a far, far less, that's a very tiny fat tail, less than 1% chance sort of thing. The everyday part of it is just being informed and helping us communicate and, making reasonable decisions, that providing a voice that would be very helpful for us. We want diversity. So let me go to these questions first. I also want to talk a little bit about the how to do that. So how do we get new blood, right? So we apparently, and according to everyone here, and I agree, there's probably another couple dozen people out there who would be interested. And one way we could think of it is the core group that, you've got responsibility if you're under a non-disclosure, right? You've got to be putting in some hours and being helpful in return for that, both externally and internally. And I don't know how long a term lasts, and I also think that if you are privy to certain information, that's got to be kind of balanced with what we get out of that. Just having people listen is not, what we're trying to do. And then if that group then, or a larger group, elects representatives, then those representatives will have a lot of responsibility, and they will need insurance, for example. All the council members will probably get insurance, and they will want to set up a method for feeding in lots of opinions or votes from the rest of the community to their vote, so that they really are a representative. There are various tools for doing this, and that's the stuff we should look into. So my proposal, and I don't know how long a term is that we first somehow decide on the core group, and we can always expand it. I don't mind. I'll put people under non-disclosure if they'll be active and helpful and won't just do it just for the heck of it. And then from there, we can talk about the next step of going toward a voting seat. Does that make sense? So step one, let's put our core group together and get them under NDA and have like a monthly core meeting. Does that make sense? And get an update and have a Mattermost channel. By the way, I don't like email. Email is so hard to mine in the past. That's why we have Mattermost, so you can just go scroll up and go. So a new person coming in under NDA can go back into the past and learn. We could even have a Token Holder Council Slack if we felt like it, but we use Mattermost most of the day. So that's. And I don't know how long a term is. It probably makes some sense to think about what it takes to become a member and to unbecome a member. And I'm sure Phil can point us to examples of documents that say exactly, bylaw. This is what bylaws do, right? There's tons of bylaws out there, most of them bad.
So a couple of generally not horrible practices involve having staggered terms. It's like the first batch of people who sign up would sign up to say, hi, I will volunteer to be on this council for, one will start off for 6 months, one will be a year, one will be 2 years, and then there's that. We would probably also want to have some sort of a process for how do you become a member of the council. Right now, we're just all sort of opting in.
Yeah.
But ideally, we would have a process whereby the greater membership would have some sort of an election, and people would nominate themselves and go, "Hi, vote for me," and so that, I mean, we can discuss this, but it's like that's how I always imagined it. That if you're going to be a representative, it's not just by self-acclamation. It's got to be, you want the bit greater pool of pillar holders to say, yeah, sure, why not? And based upon something you say about yourself.
I'd like to address those things because I've studied voting and public choice quite a bit. And first of all, I think in many cases, you want your major stakeholders to have a major voice. And in this case, I don't agree with that. I think that we're a community. And I don't think that just because people can buy more tokens or have bought more tokens, they should have a proportionally bigger voice. I think we're trying to listen to everybody and build something for the world here. So, if you have one pillar token, that's enough for me to listen to you. And if you have 1 million pillar tokens, that's not enough for you to yell at me and tell me my job. Right? So there's, I wouldn't necessarily say it's proportional voting. I would also really hate to get into what I would call straight voting. Straight voting is something that's easily hijacked and has lots of issues with voting. There are many simply mathematical errors and problems with voting that Ken Arrow has written many papers about and got a Nobel Prize for, and that we don't want to make the same mistake that so many condo associations and other nonprofits make in thinking that straight voting and some kind of representational thing is definitive, because it isn't. In fact, as you say, you may want to campaign and try to convince others, but then in that case, obviously, the people with the most Twitter followers or the people with the most social power, will have more political power in our system. That's exactly what I don't want. Right. So if anybody wants to read my writing on that, you may have already seen it. That's at votingninja.com. And I point out many ways in which the voting process can be hijacked by a minority, disguised as a majority by hijacking the process. So with that said, though, Phil, it's entirely reasonable to say that in some smart way, the council should emerge from the greater pool of interested and concerned people. It's relatively arbitrary where you draw the line. My general approach is meritocracy. That if you're interested and you're leaning forward and you're putting in the time, then heck, that's all I need. I'm not looking for your token holders badge. You may not have any token holders, but if you're in there trying to help us with our purpose, our cause, that's enough for me. So I'm pretty inclusive. If there were 30 people who are really leaning forward and into it and wanted to have access to private information, as long as I felt that they were not going to disclose that information, I would be happy to have a Zoom call with 30 people. I'm not particularly elitist about this, but I'm interested in what people think, because I'm not comfortable with 100 people, just because there's too much chance for, A, people to not do anything and just be there for the listening, and B, there's too much chance for strategic proprietary information to get out, and then that could mess up our plans. So what do people think about this in light of that? Roy?
Just to follow on from Phil's observations, and to some extent go back to Vic's earlier observations about communicating, one thing I would say is the roles of the council, whatever those are deemed to be in the end, have to be transparent to the membership from the get-go. So it's got to be quite clear what the council is there to do. And if one were to get into a voting situation, so that people are very clear what it is they're voting for in this instance, just put that one on the table.
These will all be closed votes, right, outside of the public, that where we want to gather information from people and have good, solid discussions. And then in many cases, for example, since a few of us here have studied decision science, we'll come to a decision point and we'll say, okay, well, could we take the first step, but not the next 3 steps? How could we take the first step, get there, and then, decide from there? So we're pretty careful, I think, and we've made mistakes, but when we make decisions, we think that they tend to be, what's the right way to say this? Dissenting voices may or may not have helped in those situations. And where we could probably use, if I could have my dream wish for the last, say, 6 months, it would have been to say, let's do a reality check here, make sure we're on the right path, and if we're not, how can we nip that early and communicate it to shareholders, token holders, so that they're not, overreacting or misunderstand it. And I think there's, for me, about 3 out of the last 4 months have gone a little bit too far, and you don't know the details here, with a process that had to do with kind of a monthly demo that I wanted to show people progress on, but we didn't have the right methodology or the right technology platform to do it well. And we overcommitted to showing people what was next, as opposed to saying, maybe we should just redo this because it doesn't look like it's going to get there. So, these kinds of things where, I've been in a lot of board meetings, a lot. And often you can look back and say, well, see, so-and-so warned about that. But then, so-and-so is always warning about everything, and 1 out of 10 times he's right. That doesn't necessarily mean you should do what he says every time. And on the other hand, usually you go the wrong direction by taking many small turns, right? That all look about right? And so how to have a nice diverse process of people saying, maybe we should really rethink this or try 2 different experiments and figure it out. That would be helpful.
Perhaps one of the things to also consider is not just having this conversation, but should there be some sort of a formal duty to report a status going, you do a really nice job to the general public with the video of, hi, here's where we're at on, financials, on product, on staff, and you walk your way down the list. I'm wondering if there needs to be a similar kind of a thing between management and the council. Which allows for more questions and answers.
Yeah, I'd be really happy to have a monthly call and just really bring everybody up to date. I guess I can tell you that our biggest problems over the last 4 months have been almost all technical. And so having a council the person who's made the most difference here is a guy named Greg Broem, who is a Kanban coach. He's a process coach for software development. And he's been the most helpful in saying, you guys, what you're doing is, you can't do more of this. It's not going to work. So he's got us, he hired him now, and he's kind of building, re-engineering our system of our workflow. And that's been the most helpful thing. All the board level stuff has just continued to say, well, okay, let's just see if we can get this far by this date. And that hasn't worked. So you want a bunch of different people, right? You want some people who are technical. You want some people who are marketing savvy. You want some people who are legal savvy. You want some business people. You want some kind of outliers who can say, have you considered this? What do other people?
I personally want representation as of 2 weeks ago.
I don't know what that means.
I want to see employee representation keeping a rein on what happens in here.
You would like to see employee representation.
Yes, there is none.
That's fine. Sure. Okay. That's very atypical for a foundation. It is very typical for a company to listen to its employees. So I wonder if it's appropriate at the foundation level as opposed to at the Pillar Project Worldwide Limited in London level. That might be more.
Personally, I think there's a lot of oversight needed. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, there's different levels. So I'm not sure whether it's at the level of the foundation or not. If it's at the level of $1 million decisions and up, I would say that's foundation. If it's at the level of operations, management, and so forth, that would be at the local level.
Well, just the word management in that respect is not what we do according to the grey paper, and I don't want to see that.
Right. So that's at the level of management or self-management. It's the same level, and that would not be the thing.
Josh, can I ask, what is the value? I understand the value to employees of having representation on the board. What is the value to the rest of the pillar holders for having employee representation?
Alignment with values.
For example?
I don't want to go too deep into it, but the grey paper and following the rules set out in the grey paper.
So it's sort of
Someone to oversight this, yes.
alignment with that. What is the value that employees have that the rest of the council members that are not employees might not have?
They don't see the day-to-day runnings.
Okay, so it's additional insight and observation, knowledge that you're bringing to the council.
Diversity and representation, for sure.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
That's worth discussing, for sure.
Gregory, first of all, sorry because my English is not my natural language, so I think I guessed all the messages, but maybe I'm not very good to express exactly the idea I want. So I will try, and tell me if it is not clear. I think the goal of the council is to make decision, okay? And a question I have is how to be sure, how to qualify if a decision made by the council is good or not. How will we, probably the future will say, but we have to, I think we have to measure the performance, if I can say that, of the council to try to improve the way to decide things. And the first question I could have is a good decision is the one who is representative of the token holders, or it is the one who is good for the project? Maybe sometimes it cannot be the same answer. So, okay, it's the main question I have.
Well, this is my conversation with Vic just now. It's not my job. It's not my job or role to address the concerns of token holders outside of the project. It's our job to steer the project and change the world. It's our job to make it so that Facebook is not listening to all your stuff, that you have an alternative, and you can message people privately, and no third party has a back door to give the FBI. It's our job to give you the tools to manage your private data and keep it private. It's not our job to listen to token holders saying, hey, what's up with this? You better get the price of that token up right away. I mean, this is kind of like listening to analysts on Wall Street. They have a different alignment with the guys who sell those shares and want to just move stock and pump and dump and all that stuff. So I'd like to have zero alignment with people who are interested in the price of the stock in the next month. right? Or 2 months. I'd like to have full alignment with people who are interested in the utility of the token and the ability of this token to pay for a system that, or allow you to use a system that changes everything.
Okay, so you answered the goal of the council is not to be representative of the token holder, but the one who decide for the good of the project. And if it is aligned, it's good. Else?
We could also distinguish between short-term and long-term, as we do in stocks. The only thing is that this is not a security. So if you're saying, well, I have bought a lot of these tokens because long-term, my investment horizon is 5 to 10 years, and I really want to see a great project reward me for investing in it and that will pay off my investment. I don't really care about that. I'd rather you sold a bunch of those tokens to a whole bunch of other people who would like to use them in the system and have a small share in believing in what we're doing. On the other hand, if you have a small number of tokens and you're a long-term believer in what we're doing and like to support us, and you'll support us by not only telling people, but using the product and using the tokens and bringing about a token economy that lets us do that, that's pretty exciting. So there's different, the fact that you're a token holder means nothing to me, honestly. A zero token holder could be extremely valuable here.
Okay.
Someone says, how are we going to measure the performance of the council? Very difficult in complex adaptive systems. So you can think you can measure decision quality. And what you can do is you can measure the process of making a decision. And there are 6 steps to a good decision from decision science. We know that. And you can make sure that you've done a good job of exploring all the options and weighting them correct as well as you can, bringing in as much extra information as is needed for the particular decision at hand, taking small steps and all these things. You can't really measure against the outcomes because the world has a way of handing you screwy outcomes that you didn't predict. That's why we tried to do experiments and try things. We tried having volunteers for hiring. It was an experiment. It was actually fairly costly and it didn't work that well. Worked far less well than I was hoping. We got some good people that way, but to say it was suboptimal is an understatement. We would not do it again, knowing what we know now. We would do it a different way. Now, I'm not sure exactly what way, probably some other experiment, right? But what you don't want to do is get into a habit of looking back and saying, well, that worked, that didn't work, that was a bad decision. It wasn't necessarily a bad decision. You can make a good decision and have it not work out. You can make a bad decision, get lucky, and have everything come up roses. This is very difficult. So really the way I look at it is more along the lines of commitment. Commitment and diversity, I guess, are my 2 main, right? If I'm looking for a machine that spits out token council members, I'm looking for commitment and diversity. Those are my 2 main axes. Other comments?
Again, me as always, just an observation on that. Greg's point. Might it be worthwhile considering not calling it, in that case, the Token Holders Council, simply because it can engender that confusion from the get-go?
That's true. I would call it a stakeholders council, because if you care about the project, you're a stakeholder. I'd be happy to rename it that. On the other hand, I think that token holders represent, for most ICOs, it's kind of a good, we want to be able to set an example for other ICOs as well. And they also have token holders.
I mean, I understand that. And again, we are playing with semantics and language. But again, I go back to my first observation that one of the things I had seen by following the various Mattermost threads and the various WhatsApp threads is this perception that the token is a security, and that part of the role of this to be named council was to ensure the performance issuance of that token as a security. So I think words communication, we've talked about this a lot, is really quite important.
Yes, especially since those same exact people consider every single token to be a security.
Precisely, yeah. And it's a hard job to make that distinction once that seed has been planted. You've got to do an awful lot of heavy lifting to change perceptions.
What do you think, Vic?
Yeah.
Well, it goes back to my comment about price times tokens. You've got to unlearn that behavior. And I mentioned it a few times. I've got a couple folks involved in this in Vancouver in a big way, and they're in the securities industry. So it's a learned behavior. And that's why I think someone like David or others getting on your soapbox and just being very blatant, very clear about this consistently. I'm not saying you haven't been, but it really needs to be a focus, I think, to drive this point home. This is learned behavior over decades, so we're not gonna fix this in 6 months.
Should we change it away from Token Holders Council and call it something else?
How about council? Just
advisory council?
Who an anonymous kind of term that can't be argued with. I'm much more concerned that you get some cohesive group together and get going, as opposed to talking about getting a group together and getting going, because it's time. And I think as soon as you have another asset like a council that can help produce or reinforce the positive public message, I think that'll catch on like wildfire. And I really feel like that's missing now. So,
Paul, let's hear from you.
What would you like to hear?
Well, you got your finger in the wind all day long in that Telegram channel, so tell us what's blowing over there.
Well, over in the Pillar group, I've kind of dropped out, but the main, the main focus over there is on the fiat and the fiat value and how everybody's trying to profit from that. And of course, I'm pretty much dead set against that. I'm ready to abandon the fiat system myself. So, educating people on that distinction is a tough barrier, as Vic mentioned. It's a learned behavior to associate the value of something with a fiat value. So psychologically speaking, that's where I would say most people really are. They are not really past that threshold yet of basically evaluating things in terms of, say, like Pillar. How many Pillar can I get for some, or do I need for some espresso? That's going to be something I think it's going to be important in the future, that stability. Of course, gauging it's not going to be easy. So where do we go from there? That's why we got to put it out on the floor, I guess.
If you think of all this stuff as investments, the Pillar token from where it was in July is actually up more than Ether is. A bit.
I know. Yeah, I know. But people are.
But I'm not doing that. Of course.
but people are just, they get caught up in the moment. They're watching the prices go up and down, and they're riding that little roller coaster. And dealing with that is very difficult, and trying to readjust their perceptions away from that is very tricky too. Because, well, we're back to the psychology, and that's, and unfortunately, money has a deeper rooted psychological impact on us than sex does, apparently. So, yeah, people will tell you about their sex life before they will tell you about their finances. Okay. Yeah. So, that is a huge hurdle, in my opinion, to get across, and it's not going to be easy.
See, one conversation we've had since July is getting listed on an exchange. And other people say, we got to do everything we can. We got to get listed. And maybe part of the reason we're never listed is that I don't really care. Because frankly, what I see on exchanges is a lot of pumping and dumping. You can say, well, what about liquidity? Yeah, I know about liquidity. I know a lot about liquidity, but what I see is pumping and dumping. And if you bought the token for its utility, then you can wait till the system comes out, frankly. And if you want to exchange, if you need some tokens, you're going to be able to buy some tokens. if you happen to buy too many, or for whatever reason you want to unload some, you'll be able to do that too. The pumping and dumping scares the crap out of me. I mean, people are in these Telegram groups all day long, spreading fear, uncertainty, and doubt, moving stuff in lockstep, getting in ahead of a wave, getting out at the top. You know, that's a big part of the volatility. And so, do I want liquidity? Sure, I want liquidity, but I also don't want people to get taken for a ride and say, oh gosh, should we dump our tokens because look what's going on right now. All that bothers me enough that I haven't participated that much in this. And if we'd had a token holders council for the last 6 months, you would have been in on this. And where would you come down? Well, it's not easy, right? It's difficult. Not for lack of trying. We have tried. I'm not the only person saying, I am more or less the only person who says, I don't care. Everybody else says, no, we need liquidity. So they've been trying. But these are hard questions because the more you try or the more you treat it like a security, the more everyone else thinks of it like a security. So I've been trying to buck that trend a bit. You know, I wouldn't say I was successful philosophically. It's just turned out that we haven't gotten any big exchange listings. That's just how it happened. I would have been okay if it had, you know, but
I think the video you put out this morning regarding the utility of the token actually be really helpful in that direction. Again, we're back to people trying to acquire coins, trying to get to the moon and get their Lambo. And that's just not, I don't see that's where Pillar is going.
Yeah, I wish they would play that game with other tokens because that's a fun game, but I'm not interested in being on the other side of it.
All right. Now that's about it for me at the moment.
All right. Well, I don't want to make this too formal. I see it as a kind of a collective endeavor. I would be very willing to entertain how people want to start with a council, but I'm also pretty willing to get all the people who just showed up today on the council. The only exception I would make is Greg, who maybe should come to 1 or 2 more meetings before and do a little bit more. Unless Greg, you're in the community doing a lot of things that I'm unaware of now on Mattermost, or I'm not sure.
No, I'm not very active on the Mattermost. I read essentially most of things I can, but I'm not really active.
Okay. So it's up to us, I would say, who are more of the core people, because undoubtedly there are a couple other people who are very active who we should invite. And I'd be certainly comfortable with 10 people and getting some non-disclosures out to people and getting them signed, and then have a meeting right away. I don't feel like I should say there should be 9 council holders and we're going to have council members and we're going to have interviews and we're going to exclude, or, because frankly, the navy blue caps just don't do it for me. So you better watch out. You don't want to be arbitrarily excluded. So I think we should go for who's active and who's wants to, right? That's what this is about, right? So let me propose that if there's other people that we know that we think should be, here's my proposal. I'd like to take Paul, Phil, Vic, Jen, Roy, and who's the other person who's always here? Josh is fine. That's fine. That's fine. I think there's one more person who's really out there all the time. And get you guys going and get us, and let's have a meeting, and then we can look at other names and bring them in as we all sort of think and try to do it by consensus. It's more of a consensus approach than a voting approach, if that's okay for now. And we can try to at least get some of these meetings where we understand more of the inner workings, and we can start to work more on how to communicate to the world. We of course are working on external communications as well, and we've got some consultants around on like how to communicate better. And I keep saying there's nothing like shipping a wallet. So I'm working more on product. But I would like to start this process now. So I'm going to send NDAs to the people who showed up here, but not Greg for now. And I encourage Greg to stay more active in the community and come to the next meetings. And then, if you're, as long as you're working on it, then that I have no problem. Does that make sense, Greg?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay.
And I have maybe a suggestion.
Yes.
Would you have a question to submit to the council, maybe a real question or not, and to see how the process of making the decision could naturally come?
I don't understand quite the request.
I mean, the goal of the council is to make decision, to have the experimentation. Would you have a question to submit to the council for the next time, and see how, even if I'm not in the council for now, it's okay. It's not a question about me, but to experiment the process of making the decision.
Well, we make a lot of decisions, and many of them are proprietary in-house decisions that we don't let out to the public.
Yes, of course. But to experiment this council.
So we're doing it all the time. I think what we can do is have the conversation with in our next meeting that is, with people who've signed the NDA, and figure out how we can communicate better, to interface well to other people who are concerned. That's totally valid. We don't need to have practice decisions, Greg, because we got real decisions to make all the time.
So it's better. Okay.
We're making them every day. So let's do that, if I may, and then let's figure it out from there and work toward a set of bylaws and toward some agreements that we can hammer into place, in July. And I will be happy to bring on, a second tier of people based on merit, based on activity and commitment. Make sense?
July is too far away.
Well, all we need to do is get a document that we all agree on, and we're ready to sign. I just think that we will probably have to iterate our way toward it and come up with things. We could start putting practices in place right away. We don't have to wait till July to start doing things.
Brilliant.
But I think a formal document with decision, for example, about council voting seat, all of these things, I think that's probably going to take some time. That's all. But we can.
That's fine. Well, I want to.
Start participating right away. So we'll cut off the meeting now and ship it, and then we'll send you a NDAs, and then we'll take the next meeting. We'll set up the private Mattermost channel. Is everybody okay with Mattermost? And we'll get you guys invited to the private Mattermost, and then we'll set the date of the next meeting probably for about 10 days or so from now. I've got a crazy travel schedule, but we'll see what we can work out, and all get together as soon as we can. Vic?
Just question on consensus. Are a number of you going to be available in New York?
Yeah, and I mean, this is not the big announcement time, but we've said in the newsletter that we want to have a meetup in New York. Nobody really said they want to have a token council meeting. A token holder.
I'm just curious who is, because I know you have a booth, so I assume.
We're working on a meetup for the evening of the 15th. Okay. And we're actually thinking about a location for that. You and I could talk about that. Actually, why don't you stay on after I stop the recording? Let me stop the recording now. We'll ship this to the channel. And then we'll say bye, everybody. Bye to the recording.